The grey waters of the North Atlantic churned violently as HMS Westcott cut through 12-foot swells, her bow throwing up curtains of white spray into the bitter March morning. Below deck, in the cramped sonar compartment, an operator hunched over his equipment, his eyes fixed on the greenish glow of the display screen. The metallic ping of the ASDIC system echoed through the hull at regular intervals. Searching the dark depths for the enemy that naval intelligence had warned was somewhere ahead of convoy HX-72. Ping, pause, ping. The sound became almost hypnotic, each repetition a prayer cast into the abyss. Contact bearing 090, range 1,200 yards. The operator's voice crackled through the ship's communication system, cutting through the steady rumble of engines and the relentless hammer of waves against steel. Up on the bridge, Lieutenant Commander James Walsh felt something tighten in his chest. Another U-boat. Another deadly dance in these killing waters where merchant ships burned and men drowned in the freezing cold. All ahead full, come right to 090, Walsh commanded, his voice steady even as adrenaline coursed through his veins. The Westcott surged forward, her bow lifting and plunging through the swells, her 4-inch guns trained uselessly ahead. Depth charges were all that mattered now, the only weapons that could reach down and destroy a submerged target, but only if you could place them directly over the submarine's position. Only if you maintained contact long enough to know exactly where to drop them. Range 800 yards and closing, sir. The ASDIC contact grew stronger with each passing second, a solid echo returning from the depths, the submarine becoming clearer on the sonar display. Walsh watched the numbers tick downward, his mind calculating the geometry of the kill. 700 yards, 600, 500. But then came the moment every destroyer captain dreaded. At 200 yards, the Westcott's own sonar dome would create a blind spot directly ahead. The returning acoustic beam would be blocked by the destroyer's hull itself, leaving Walsh firing blind into the darkness, dropping his weapons based on calculations and hope rather than solid targeting information. Range 300 yards, sir. Contact weakening. The inevitable was approaching fast. Range 200 yards. Contact lost, sir. He's gone dark. In that instant, the submarine vanished from the screen, swallowed by the acoustic shadow that every U-boat captain understood perfectly. Walsh didn't hesitate. "Pattern Baker 7, he shouted. The depth charges tumbled from the stern racks and K-gun launchers, their clockwork fuses set for different depths. The Westcott's wake churned white as the heavy cylinders arced through the air and disappeared into the Atlantic, each one packed with 300 pounds of TNT. The explosions came 15 seconds later, massive columns of water erupting behind the destroyer, the concussions hammering through the ship's hull, rattling equipment and throwing sailors against bulkheads. For 30 seconds, the sea boiled with acoustic chaos, making any sonar contact impossible. When the water finally cleared, the ASDIC operator searched desperately for signs of success. Debris, oil, the distinctive sound of a submarine breaking up under pressure. Nothing. The U-boat had vanished, slipping away through those crucial blind moments when the destroyer had lost contact. "Resume search pattern," Walsh ordered, his voice heavy with the knowledge that somewhere ahead, U-47 was maneuvering into attack position. Within hours, the convoys under his protection would be burning. 8,000 miles away in London, Dr. Charles Frederick Goodeve studied the tactical reports from convoy battles with the methodical precision of a physical chemist examining laboratory data. The 36-year-old Canadian had never stood on a warship's bridge, had never heard the roar of depth charges detonating beneath the sea. But his analytical mind dissected naval combat with the same systematic approach he had once applied to industrial chemistry problems in peacetime Manitoba. The numbers were brutal and unforgiving. Conventional depth charge attacks succeeded only once in every 60 attempts. Destroyers lost sonar contact in those final crucial moments before weapon release, forced to attack blind. The acoustic chaos from depth charge explosions created a 15-minute window during which submarines could slip away undetected. And the geometric reality was damning. Fast-moving U-boats could simply outrun the attack pattern. Goodeve had been recruited into the Royal Navy's Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, a group mockingly called the Weasels and Dodgers by regular naval officers. Not because he possessed maritime experience, but because Britain's desperate war effort needed every brilliant mind it could find. He had grown up on the shores of Lake Winnipeg, learning problem-solving by refurbishing old boats with clever hands and prairie ingenuity. Now that same practical approach was focused on the war's most critical challenge, stopping German submarines from strangling Britain's lifelines across the Atlantic. The solution seemed obvious to his scientist's mind. What if depth charges could be fired forward instead of dropped behind? What if ships could maintain sonar contact right up to the moment of weapon impact? What if unsuccessful attacks didn't create acoustic chaos that allowed submarines to escape? When Goodeve presented his radical concept to the Directorate of Naval Ordnance, the response was swift and dismissive. "Absolute rubbish," declared the senior naval constructor. "You can't fire depth charges forward. The ship's own sonar dome would be destroyed by the blast effects. Physics won't allow it. Besides, what does a civilian chemist know about naval warfare?" The Royal Navy carried centuries of tradition in its skepticism. They knew what worked. Depth charges had been the standard anti-submarine weapon since the First World War. The doctrine was proven, the tactics were established, the equipment was manufactured in quantity. Why risk revolutionary change when evolutionary improvement would suffice? But that night, as Goodeve walked through the blackout darkness of wartime London, he received a telegram that transformed theoretical analysis into personal urgency. His old sailing companion from Lake Winnipeg, now serving aboard HMCS Sackville as a Canadian corvette escort in the North Atlantic, had been killed when his ship was torpedoed 3 days earlier. The personal had become tactical. This was no longer about proving a scientific theory or challenging naval tradition. This was about saving lives. The civilian chemist who had never heard a shot fired in anger now carried the weight of knowing that every day his anti-submarine weapon remained theoretical. More merchant sailors died in the freezing darkness of the Atlantic. U-boats were already maneuvering into attack positions, their commanders confident that British destroyers would lose contact in those final crucial moments, dropping their charges blind while submarines slipped away to kill again. What Goodeve didn't yet know was that his impossible idea would eventually arm a small American destroyer escort for the most devastating submarine hunt in naval history. 6 enemy submarines destroyed in 12 days, a record that would stand for 80 years. The partnership between Charles Goodeve and Major Mills Jeffress began with engineering blueprints spread across a requisition table in the basement of the Admiralty building. 2 men from entirely different worlds united by the urgent need to kill submarines more efficiently. Jeffress was a British Army explosives expert with greying hair and steady hands scarred from years of handling volatile compounds. The crucial military credibility that Goodeve's civilian status lacked. More importantly, he understood the mechanical principles behind Lieutenant Colonel Blacker's spigot mortar, a revolutionary infantry weapon that fired projectiles using steel rods instead of conventional gun barrels. "The concept is sound," Jeffress said, studying Goodeve's sketches with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades turning theoretical weapons into battlefield reality. 24 small bombs fired in an elliptical pattern ahead of the ship. Each projectile weighs 65 pounds with 35 pounds of Torpex explosive, enough to crack any submarine's pressure hull on direct contact. The key innovation lay in the contact fusing system. Unlike depth charges that exploded at predetermined depths, whether they hit anything or not, Goodeve's forward-fired projectiles would detonate only when striking a submarine's steel hull. Miss the target completely, and the weapons would sink harmlessly to the ocean floor without creating the acoustic chaos that allowed U-boats to escape during conventional attacks. But translating theory into practice proved nightmarish. The contact fuse had to survive a 130-foot fall from the ship's launcher into churning seawater, arm itself during the descent, and explode reliably when hitting a submarine's hull, but not when reaching the ocean floor minutes later. The engineering challenges seemed insurmountable. After 3 months of watching prototypes fail one after another, the initiative seemed destined to become just another abandoned concept gathering dust with all the other extraordinary ideas that never made it past the testing phase. Lieutenant Commander H.D. Lucas, a Royal Navy ordnance expert whose meticulous approach rivaled that of a master craftsman working with delicate timepieces, finally cracked the detonation puzzle through relentless technical innovation. His solution employed a mechanism triggered by water contact that armed the projectile only while descending, paired with a sensor that could tell the difference between striking hard steel plating and impacting soft mud or sand on the ocean floor. The device becomes active at 20 feet during descent, Lucas explained to Goodyear one bitter December morning at the Port Smith Proving Grounds. The velocity of the impact determines how the sensor responds. Strike a submarine moving at 30 knots beneath the surface and you get immediate detonation. But strike the bottom moving just 5 knots after falling from above and nothing happens. Every single part had undergone hundreds of tests, improved through countless attempts until the entire system functioned with precision engineering reliability. The resulting weapon looked nothing like traditional naval ordnance. 24 steel tubes extended from a launching frame that mounted just forward of a ship's bridge, with each tube capable of launching a single projectile using a small explosive propellant. The projectiles spread across roughly 100 feet of width and 200 feet of length, sufficient spacing to ensure multiple impacts on any submarine caught within that zone. By May 1941, the first actual firing tests took place in Liverpool Bay. HMS Westcott, the destroyer that had pursued U-47 months before without success, moved gradually toward a sunken merchant ship resting in 40 feet of water, an ideal target for testing how effectively the new weapon would perform against a submarine-sized vessel on the seafloor. Range 400 yards, announced the gunnery officer as Westcott positioned itself for the attack. The Hedgehog launcher, as sailors had already nicknamed it for its resemblance to the spiky British animal, swung toward the submerged wreck with mechanical exactness. Orders given, fire at your discretion. Lieutenant Commander Walsh, still troubled by his inability to destroy U-47, observed 24 projectiles soar across his ship's bow in a perfect curved trajectory. The weapons slipped into the water with scarcely a disturbance, their streamlined forms piercing the surface like diving birds. Then silence stretched out for 10 full seconds. When the first explosions erupted, multiple blasts reverberating through Westcott's frame as the Hedgehog rounds struck their mark. The water above the wreck erupted in successive columns of white spray, each detonation proving that Lucas's fusing design worked precisely as intended. "Multiple impacts registered, sir," the sonar operator called out, his voice filled with genuine amazement at what he was witnessing. "Numerous explosions on target, the wreck is disintegrating." For the first time since warfare had begun, a British anti-submarine system had maintained accuracy through an entire attack. By December 1941, Hedgehog equipment was being fitted throughout Royal Navy escort vessels. The weapon's benefits went beyond improved accuracy. Missed attacks produced no sonic disturbance, which meant ships could keep tracking their prey and launch multiple assaults until achieving contact. German U-boat captains began reporting a new variety of assault that seemed to pursue them regardless of their evasive attempts. Yet operational reality quickly disappointed those involved. Kill rates stayed around just 5%, barely superior to ordinary depth charges. Atlantic salt water corroded the electrical detonation components, producing unpredictable malfunctions that squandered ordnance and gave away the attacking vessel's location. Numerous commanders actually favored the dramatic blasts of depth charges over the unsettling quiet when Hedgehog rounds went nowhere. Admiral Sir Percy Noble, top authority for Western approaches, released an order reflecting the Royal Navy's dissatisfaction with the weapon. Commanding officers equipped with Hedgehog shall provide written justification regarding why Hedgehog was not deployed during submarine detection. This directive demonstrated the inner conflict between embracing fresh innovation and adhering to established naval traditions. Many seasoned commanders still had faith in their depth charges rather than this untested mechanism created by civilians. Charles Goodyear spent evenings analyzing reports from actual combat, showing his theoretical achievement unable to meet practical demands. Testing conditions showed flawless operation, yet battlefield situations exposed problems. Laboratory conditions never could replicate. Salt-corroded wiring connections. turbulent water knocked the launcher out of alignment. Most importantly, numerous vessels were firing prematurely before reaching the perfect angle to place submarine targets directly within the lethal zone. The mastery required surpassed everyone's expectations. Vessels required persistent sonar observation straight through the firing moment, precisely opposite to depth charge procedures that anticipated losing contact during the last phase of approach. Personnel required extended training to synchronize their sonar readings with firing timing, demanding a degree of coordination and accuracy that traditional submarine hunting had never previously required. Still, methodical enhancement progressively delivered improvement. The advantage became strikingly evident. When Hedgehog missed, the sea remained calm, permitting continuous tracking and repeated salvos until succeeding. Should depth charges miss, the concussions create 15 minutes where submarines can navigate away toward safety. The Hedgehog's debut operational year delivered frustration rather than achievement, as battle reports streamed into the Admiralty depicting a system performing brilliantly during trials, yet faltering against genuine Atlantic circumstances. February 1942's action report from HMS Vines captured these initial struggles perfectly. Hedgehog projectiles fired at U-boat position at 0800 hours, no blasts observed, fell back on standard depth charge engagement with nil results. Restrained language masked the crew's disappointment, watching their cutting-edge weapon function silently while the adversary escaped. During a convoy protection operation in March 1942, Lieutenant Commander David Lewis, serving aboard HMS Hesperus, confronted the weapon's most recurring technical challenge. Days of intense ocean swells had saturated the Hedgehog's electrical components with corrosive seawater, the salt penetrating every contact, despite waterproof enclosures that performed admirably during harbor demonstrations. When sonar ultimately detected a U-boat pursuing the transport ships, Lewis activated the launcher and observed helplessly as merely 12 of 24 rounds actually discharged. The rest remained inert within their tubes like fractured teeth. The blasted contraptions less dependable than a politician's word. Lewis grumbled to his weapons chief while resuming the pursuit using conventional depth charges. This frustration pervaded the service, where capable officers increasingly dismissed the Hedgehog as an experimental gadget, imposed by scientific consultants unfamiliar with genuine U-boat confrontations. The psychological element caused equivalent complications. Depth charges delivered striking displays that convinced personnel something meaningful occurred, regardless of whether the U-boat actually perished. Hedgehog failures produced unsettling emptiness, leaving sailors questioning whether systems malfunctioned entirely or simply failed to connect. That soundless void became synonymous with letdown for personnel conditioned to the forceful shocks from conventional weapons. Charles Goodeve comprehended these battlefield difficulties while making rounds through British naval installations, personally conversing with personnel returning from protection assignments. Grievances adhered to consistent themes: electrical problems during harsh weather, mechanical troubles with the launching apparatus, and critically, the challenge of synchronizing tracking readings with firing timing during intense engagement. Multiple captains confessed they reverted to depth charges, less due to superior function, but because of familiarity and perceived reliability. Organizational opposition exceeded simple mechanical concerns. Admiral Sir Max Horton, a former submarine captain grasping underwater operations more thoroughly than most commanders, voiced the Royal Navy's reservations bluntly. "We have neutralized submarines utilizing depth charges since 1917. This Hedgehog apparatus demands flawless sonar observation continuously until discharge, something remarkably tricky when a submarine commander recognizes he's being pursued." But underneath the disappointment and setbacks, incremental refinements were steadily materializing. Destroyers utilizing Hedgehog were acquiring battle knowledge beyond classroom instruction or training scenarios. The breakthrough moment came with HMS Wanderer's strike on U-131 in April 1942. The conflict's initial confirmed Hedgehog success, accomplished only when Lieutenant Commander Anthony Pugsley executed 3 successive assaults, utilizing each unsuccessful attempt to improve his angle until accomplishing optimal target positioning. Success requires steadfast determination, Pugsley documented in his combat summary. Depth charge procedure assumes you'll lose your target. Therefore, you release everything on a single attempt and trust fortune aids you. Hedgehog operates differently. Persistence pays off. Sustain your target. Launch, evaluate, recalibrate, and launch repeatedly until achieving success. His battlefield innovation became the basis for revised combat protocols that converted the weapon from one desperate strike into a calculated pursuit mechanism. The advancement accelerated as additional vessels obtained practical experience employing the framework. Investigation determined that tracking effectiveness wasn't the weapon's defining characteristic. Rather, it was the opportunity to conduct successive engagements without interrupting sonar surveillance. Unsuccessful hedgehog firing kept waters undisturbed, permitting constant observation, allowing salvos separated by moments until achieving results. By late 1942, accomplishment percentages rose as combat strategies matured, matching the weapon's particular advantages. Commanders learned methodical submarine pursuit, computing precise firing parameters before launching their rounds. The emotional climate gradually transformed from aggravation to assurance, as personnel grasped they could methodically hunt submarines utilizing discipline rather than betting on destruction and luck. The weapon attained crucial affirmation when HMS Westcott registered 2 confirmed kills within 24 hours following a March 1943 protective operation. Lieutenant Commander A.H.G. Storrs exhibited the combat methods rendering Hedgehog formidable. Sustain continuous tracking during your approach, release only once the prey sits inside the optimal strike area, and continue watching to execute immediate subsequent salvos if your initial salvo fails. By mid-1943, Admiral Noble's mandate demanding justifications for Hedgehog non-deployment started generating contrasting reports. Rather than rationalizations for abandoning the apparatus, commanders transmitted combat accomplishments and demanded extra ordnance allocations. The doubt gradually transformed into genuine professional confidence as actual combat validated the weapon's capacity when tactically sound. The transition from novel prototype to recognized instrument quickened once the Hedgehog transferred across the Atlantic through reciprocal lease arrangements to United States forces. American manufacturing facilities permitted industrial-scale generation, whereas American destroyers supplied the lightweight framework ideally suited for the launching device. American personnel, free from Royal Navy conventional limitations regarding submarine engagement doctrine, examined the apparatus with fresh strategic thinking that additional refined battle techniques. During prosperous engagements against U-16 and U-801 during spring 1943, Commander John Waters, commanding a United States destroyer, displayed American tactical creativity. His coordinated approach had multiple destroyers synchronizing Hedgehog strikes with a single vessel sustaining tracking, whilst additional craft maneuvered to ideal discharge positions. The repercussions devastated German submarine personnel accustomed to utilizing acoustic tumult from depth charge explosions for concealment, discovering no protection from the relentless observation that Hedgehog tactics delivered. Charles Goodeve, tracking progress from his London workplace, ultimately recognized his theoretical accomplishment, achieving practical implementation. The mechanism that naval authorities had deemed completely worthless was now eradicating submarines at multiplied efficiency rates compared to standard ordnance. Properly equipped destroyers with competent personnel were neutralizing U-boats with exceptional rapidity. The factual information became irrefutable by late 1943. Standard depth charge engagements produced singular victories for approximately 60 assault runs, reflecting constraints inherent to stern-mounted systems discharged blindly during terminal approach phases. Properly equipped Hedgehog destroyers attained ratios approaching singular successes per approximately 6 engagements. Tenfold superiority validating Goodeve's assertions regarding forward-mounted systems sustaining observation throughout battles. May 1944 materialized in the Pacific. Admiral Somu Toyota examined his maritime headquarters' strategic layout, contemplating Japan's circumstances for detecting and battling looming American strikes. Intelligence networks confirmed the vast gathering of American forces at Manus in the Admiralty Islands. It was unmistakable preparation for something massive, an amphibious operation headed for somewhere in the Central Pacific. The question burning through Japanese command headquarters was simple: where would they strike? Admiral Soichiro Isoroku Toyota conceived an answer that relied on elegant simplicity. He would establish a submarine picket line stretching across the most probable approach routes. These underwater sentries would reveal American intentions through their movements and radio reports alone. 7 submarines would form this submerged early warning network, an arc of vigilance stretching from Truk toward the Admiralty Islands. I-16, RO-104, RO-105, RO-106, RO-108, RO-116, and RO-117 would take their positions. Each boat would monitor its assigned waters, transmit reports that would give the combined fleet those critical hours needed to organize for the decisive naval battle Toyota envisioned. What remained hidden from Toyota's calculations was the American Signal Intelligence Station at Pearl Harbor. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific had spent months intercepting and decoding Japanese submarine orders, reading operational plans almost as soon as they reached Japanese commanders themselves. The Americans held all the cards without the Japanese knowing it. They understood precisely where each submarine waited, the exact patrol sectors assigned, even the communication schedules that would govern the information flow back to Tokyo. The hunters, unknowingly, had become the hunted. Neither side yet grasped the full weight of this reversal. USS England carried the pennant number DE-635. She was a Buckley-class destroyer escort, the embodiment of American industrial capacity transformed into anti-submarine warfare capability. At 306 feet in length, displacing 1,400 tons, her hull bristled with the latest detection equipment. Radar systems scanned the skies and seas. Sonar arrays listened into the depths below. But the weapon that would define her place in history was something newer, something revolutionary. A forward-mounted Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar sent across the Atlantic from the Royal Navy through reverse Lend-Lease agreements. Lieutenant Commander Walton Buchanan Pendleton commanded her. He was a career naval officer, quiet in his professionalism, who understood that effective submarine hunting demanded 3 things: patience, precision, and absolute faith in both his crew and his weapons. At 28 years old, Pendleton had already made his mark through earlier Pacific operations. He had earned recognition not through reckless aggression, but through tactical soundness and the kind of steady judgment under fire that kept sailors alive when things went wrong. The first encounter arrived on May 19th. England was sailing near Buin in the Solomon Islands when her sonar operator detected a contact. A Japanese submarine was there, delivering rice and supplies to isolated troops ashore. The submarine was I-16, commanded by Yoshiaki Eto, who had spent the war's opening years sinking merchant vessels with torpedo attacks. But those days had passed. Now his boat was reduced to supply runs, vulnerable to the hunter-killer groups that prowled the Pacific, searching for exactly this kind of prey. Sonar contact bearing 045, range 2,000 yards, the operator reported. Pendleton's mind moved through the familiar choreography of submarine hunting. Course adjustments to narrow the distance, calculations of depth and bearing to determine the target's path, methodical positioning to achieve the perfect firing angle without alerting the enemy. Pendleton had absorbed the tactical lessons that Royal Navy escorts had purchased with blood in the North Atlantic. Keep sonar contact alive throughout the approach. Fire only when the target moves through the Hedgehog's effective zone. Most importantly, maintain tracking after each attack so immediate follow-up salvos could be launched if the first attempt failed. This weapon required patience. It punished rushed decisions. The first 4 Hedgehog attacks found nothing but empty ocean. 24 projectiles fell harmlessly around I-16 as Ito fought desperately to escape the relentless tracking that gave him no sanctuary. Unlike depth charge attacks that filled the water with acoustic chaos, allowing submarines to slip away in the confusion, the Hedgehog permitted continuous sonar monitoring. The hunt became methodical, almost inevitable. The 5th attack brought fulfillment to what Charles Goodeve had envisioned years earlier in wartime London. Multiple Hedgehog projectiles struck the submarine's pressure hull. Contact explosions cracked through the water, followed immediately by a massive secondary detonation. The ammunition magazine had exploded. The blast was so violent it lifted England's stern and threw sailors across the deck. "Submarine destroyed, sir," the sonar operator reported as debris and oil rose to the surface where I-16 had vanished. England's crew marked their first kill with a submarine silhouette painted on the bridge. It would not be their last. Working alongside sister ships USS George and USS Robbie, England began methodically dismantling Toyota's picket line. Each contact followed the same relentless script. Sonar would announce the target. Pendleton's ship would approach with calculated precision. The Hedgehog would fire. Contact explosions would light the depths, the secondary blast would follow, and another Japanese submarine would join I-16 in the darkness below. RO-104 fell on May 22nd after a prolonged chase that showed how submarine hunting had evolved. Pendleton refused to rush. He made repeated Hedgehog runs while maintaining perfect sonar contact until the firing solution was exact, placing the target dead within the weapon's lethal envelope. Patience had become the foundation for systematic destruction. Traditional depth-charge tactics could not have afforded such deliberation, but the Hedgehog changed everything. RO-104 died on May 24th, caught in the act of trying to radio Combined Fleet headquarters about England's presence. The submarine's transmission ended abruptly mid-sentence. Hedgehog projectiles found their mark, and silence replaced the attempt to warn Tokyo. At Pearl Harbor, Fleet Radio Unit monitored Japanese communications with quiet satisfaction. Submarine after submarine failed to report when expected. Each missing transmission told the story of another successful engagement. Toyota's intelligence network was dissolving piece by piece, eliminated before it could reveal American intentions. Admiral Toyota himself had no idea his entire system was collapsing. RO-116 was destroyed on May 25th, following the same pattern that had proven so devastatingly effective. Persistent tracking, methodical Hedgehog attacks, the inevitable secondary explosion that marked another confirmed kill. England's crew had honed their hunting technique to mechanical perfection. Each engagement taught lessons. Each lesson improved the next attack. By May 26th, 5 Japanese submarines had been destroyed in 7 days. No one in naval history had achieved a success rate like this. Everything Charles Goodeve had theorized about forward-firing anti-submarine weapons was proving true in practice. Maintain target contact throughout the engagement. Conduct repeated attacks without acoustic interference from earlier explosions. Know that persistent tracking would eventually force a killing shot. It was revolution, not mere refinement. Toyota's intelligence network was evaporating without his knowledge. The reports that should have guided Japanese strategy never arrived. England pulled into Manus on May 26th to replenish her Hedgehog ammunition. Her crew painted submarine silhouettes on her bridge, professional satisfaction in their eyes. 5 enemy submarines in 8 days. But they had no way of knowing what awaited them. 1 Japanese submarine remained. RO-105 was still at sea, the last fragment of Toyota's early warning network. Her captain was desperately trying to avoid the American hunter-killer groups that had systematically erased his squadron. He would test every tactical lesson Pendleton's crew had learned, pushing them toward an achievement even more remarkable than what had come before. RO-105 became the most difficult prey England would face. Her captain possessed the desperate cunning of a submarine officer who had watched his entire squadron sink into the Pacific depths. Lieutenant Toshio Yoshikawa understood the subtle arts of underwater survival. He varied his depth unpredictably. He used thermal layers in the water to break sonar contact. He exploited the ocean's acoustic properties to confuse tracking systems. On May 30th, RO-105 was running submerged northeast of Truk. Her batteries had been drained by 18 hours beneath the surface. Yoshikawa faced the eternal submarine dilemma: surface and risk detection by American aircraft, or remain submerged until the batteries failed completely, leaving his boat helpless to drift. He made his choice. England detected RO-105 at dawn as the submarine surfaced to charge her batteries. Sonar contact established at maximum range. Pendleton studied the tactical situation with the methodical precision that had made his ship the most successful submarine killer in naval history. 6 enemy submarines destroyed in 12 days, but this final target was different. It refused to follow the patterns of previous engagements. Contact bearing 180, range 4,000 yards, England's sonar operator reported. The familiar approach began. Course corrections to close distance, speed adjustments to optimize tracking, careful positioning for the perfect hedgehog firing solution. But RO-105's captain had learned from watching his squadron's destruction. As England closed, Yoshikawa executed sharp course changes designed to break sonar contact and force the American ship to resort to active pinging, revealing her position. He understood that his only chance lay in those brief moments when enemy sonar lost him. Seconds he could use to maneuver into firing position for a desperate torpedo attack. The first Hedgehog salvo missed. The submarine twisted away from the predicted intercept point. 24 projectiles fell harmlessly into empty water. Unlike the previous fights where near misses had quickly led to successful follow-up shots, RO-105 seemed to anticipate each firing run. She maneuvered with an aggression that suggested her captain had decoded the tactical pattern making England so deadly. "He's learning our tricks," Pendleton said to his executive officer as they prepared another attack. The comment carried grudging professional respect for an adversary who refused to die easily, fighting back with the skill and determination that had always characterized Japan's best submarine captains. The second and third Hedgehog attacks also achieved no contact explosions, though each salvo forced the submarine deeper and pushed her further from her intended course. Pendleton recognized the tactical mathematics at play. His ship held advantages in persistence and ammunition supply. RO-105's batteries were draining with each evasive maneuver. Eventually, physics would decide the matter. USS George and USS Robbie arrived to assist, but Division Commander Captain Charles Momsen grew frustrated with the extended hunt. Previous kills had been achieved within hours. This submarine was consuming the entire day. Radio traffic filled with impatient queries about when this engagement would end. "Go ahead, England," Momsen finally radioed. "You have primary responsibility. The other vessels will maintain blocking positions." The transmission reflected confidence in England's proven abilities and recognition that Pendleton's crew possessed the specialized submarine hunting skills this particular quarry demanded. The breakthrough came at 0736 hours on May 30th. Lieutenant Junior Grade John Williamson, England's sonar operator, detected the subtle acoustic signature of a submarine attempting to surface. RO-105's batteries had reached critical levels. Yoshikawa had no choice but to risk exposure rather than allow his life support systems to fail and his boat to drift helplessly. Pendleton ordered full speed ahead. He raced to achieve firing position before the submarine could complete her surface routine and escape at higher speed. The tactical calculation was exacting. Arrive at optimal range while the target remained submerged and vulnerable. But before she could gain the surface mobility that would complicate attack geometry. Range 800 yards, target steady on bearing 180, Williamson reported. England approached her final firing position. The Hedgehog launcher trained forward. 24 contact-fused projectiles waited in their spigots. 6 enemy submarines had already fallen to this weapon and this crew. The 7th would not escape. The last Hedgehog attack brought exactly what Charles Goodeve had envisioned when he first proposed forward-firing anti-submarine weapons. 6 to 10 projectiles struck RO-105's pressure hull in rapid succession. Contact detonations cracked through the water. Then came the characteristic massive secondary explosion. Ammunition and fuel detonated in a blast that sent a column of water 200 feet skyward into the morning air. Submarine destroyed, Williamson reported with professional calm that barely concealed the gravity of the moment. England's crew painted their 6th submarine silhouette on the bridge. The tally represented the most successful submarine hunt in the history of naval warfare. The strategic implications extended far beyond ship statistics. Admiral Toyota's entire submarine picket line had been systematically destroyed. Combined Fleet Headquarters was now completely blind to American intentions at the crucial moment when intelligence might have reshaped Japanese strategy. Convinced that the massive Allied buildup at Manus meant an assault on Palau, Toyota positioned his main battle fleet far to the west of where Americans actually intended to strike. 2 weeks later, American amphibious forces invaded Saipan, Guam, and Tinian in the Mariana Islands, precisely the opposite direction from where Japanese naval commanders had concentrated their defenses. The Mariana Islands campaign succeeded partly because Japan's submarine early warning network no longer existed. A single American destroyer escort, armed with a weapon that naval experts had once called impossible, had eliminated it entirely. Admiral Ernest King's declaration that there would always be an England in the United States Navy acknowledged unprecedented achievement. But the deeper victory belonged to Charles Goodave and the principle that scientific innovation could challenge military tradition. The presidential unit citation honored not just England's crew, but the civilian chemist whose unorthodox thinking had revolutionized anti-submarine warfare. The final statistics told the story with absolute clarity. Traditional depth charge attacks throughout the war averaged 1 kill for every 60 attempts. A ratio reflecting the geometric limitations of weapons dropped blind during the final approach. Hedgehog-equipped ships achieved ratios approaching 1 kill for every 6 attacks. Forward-firing weapons, maintaining contact throughout the engagement, represented genuine revolution in naval warfare, not merely incremental improvement. Charles Goodave, now Sir Charles Goodave, OBEFRS, had transformed from an unknown civilian chemist into the architect of Allied advantage in submarine warfare. His quiet persistence in challenging naval orthodoxy had created the weapon system enabling England's historic achievement. 6 enemy submarines destroyed in 12 days. A record that would remain unbroken for 80 years, standing as testimony to what civilian innovation could accomplish when applied to military problems that traditional thinking could never solve.